This content is brought to you by Uphold, which makes crypto investing easy. I've been a user of Uphold since 2017. They're one of my go-to exchanges. You can buy, sell, and trade cryptocurrencies on Uphold. You can also trade precious metals and equities. They have 10 plus million users, 250 plus cryptocurrencies, and they're available in 150 countries. As with all exchanges, you can buy and sell on them, but I highly recommend you custody your own crypto, not your keys, not your coins. If you'd like to learn more about Uphold, please visit the link in the description. Welcome back to the Thinking Crypto podcast, your home for cryptocurrency news and interviews. With me today is Hailey Lennon, who's a partner at Brown Rudnick, a contributor at Forbes Crypto, and the founder of Crypto Connect. Hailey, it's great to have you back on the show.
Good to see you. It's been a long time and a lot's happened since we last talked.
Oh, yeah. Since 2021, we spoke, and boy, have things changed since then. Lots to talk about. And of course, you have your ears to the ground on all things from a legal perspective and what's happening in the crypto industry. But let's start with Bitcoin Miami, the conference that took place last week. You attended. How was it? Well, were there any big takeaways?
It was awesome. I mean, I've been attending Bitcoin Magazine's conferences since like 2019. It used to be in San Francisco and was very small that year. And so I've seen it kind of go in ebbs and flows. Yeah, I mean, I thought most of the content was amazing and the networking is always top tier. And this year, it felt a little smaller. I think there's some bear market vibes. There was more events that were charging ticket prices instead of free entry and that sort of thing. But sometimes that kind of shakes out the fair weather fans, and you have the people that have, are committed to the space and are in it not when the price is high, but all the time and building stuff. So I thought it was great.
Yeah, you got to be a true believer to make it out to these conferences during a bear market, right? When Bitcoin's price is not at an all-time high, there's not a lot of hype. It's just about the building and continued adoption.
Less Lambos, less champagne popping, but the conversations were great. And I'm actually disappointed that it won't be in Miami anymore. They're moving it to Nashville after this year. And I just thought Miami was kind of a cool vibe, but I'm sure it'll be great in Nashville too.
Oh, I didn't even know about that. Wow. Nashville is not bad, but yeah, I can't compare it to Miami, of course.
Yeah, for sure.
Now there was an update as far as where you're working, because last time we spoke, you were at Anderson Kill, but now you're at Brown Rudnick. Tell us about that transition, and are you still involved in crypto items?
Yeah. So my focus is still 100% crypto. I tell close friends that I'm not even sure I would enjoy being an attorney if it wasn't this industry specifically. It ignited my excitement early on. And as we're going to talk about today, the regulations are always changing, and that's my focus. So we have built out a really strong crypto fintech practice at Anderson Kill, led by Stephen Pally. And Brown Rudnick, came to us and said, we're really looking to bolster our crypto practice group, and we'd love to acquire you all as a joint group and bring you over. So that's great, because I work with Preston Byrne, Stephen Pally, other partners that I just adore working with. And so for it to be sort of a full team move over has been great. And part of why we were really excited about that is Brown Rudnick has so many additional departments and specialties that directly impact crypto companies. So whether it be securities law, security registration, tax questions, fund formation, there's all these things that we now have this huge pool of amazing, other partners that we can pull into these things and kind of be a one-stop shop for clients, even if they're startups and then grow. So it's just been, I couldn't be happier with the move, and still 100% focused on crypto and blockchain technology.
So I have to ask, have you guys been crazy busy? Because we've had a tsunami of enforcement actions, a lot of confusion happening in the market, Operation Chokepoint 2.0, the debanking of crypto. How have things been for you guys?
Yeah, it's been crazy to see. We're definitely busier. And, some people joke, oh, well, that's, good job security. But as an actual Bitcoin holder and an advocate for the space also, it gets frustrating. One department I didn't mention at Brown Rudnick that has always been very strong is bankruptcy. And so as a result, we're publicly involved in representing some of the unsecured creditor committees for the bankruptcies that have happened in the space over the last year. The SEC enforcement actions have definitely kept us busy. Even a lot of SEC investigations that aren't public knowledge yet, those require a lot of time and attention to try to prevent it from turning into a bigger enforcement action and responding to those quickly. So my focus years ago was more on the proactive side of things instead of the defensive side of things, which I like more. So getting bank charters, getting money transmitter licenses, getting the New York Bit license, allowing companies to launch in these places. So there's been a little bit of shift away from that, especially because it is a bear market. Companies have less money to spend, and there continues to be so little regulatory clarity. So, I think the legal work in this industry kind of ebbs and flows in different directions, but we're definitely we have our hands full.
Now, I think one item I didn't mention at the introduction, you were, I believe, legal counsel at Silvergate Bank, and this ties in with Operation Chokepoint 2.0 and the bank collapses and the bank runs we're seeing. Yeah. Tell us about, what you're hearing, and obviously your experience at Silvergate, and even what Barney Frank had to say, and what's been going on in these folks trying to debank crypto companies.
Yeah, it's been crazy. I mean, the banking topic has kind of woven through my career. So I started at Silvergate Bank. They, their dedication to the space was, how do we safely bank and determine who to bank in the crypto industry? Because there is this philosophy that all, areas, all types of products, all different companies should be able to have access to banks as long as what they're doing is legal. The first time we saw, sort of a bank choke point to 1.0 was in the gun industry. Yeah. When banks really kind of clamped down on the regulations surrounding guns and providing bank accounts to them. Now we're seeing it in the crypto space. And I mean, what I can say about Silvergate is I helped build that program, and I really liked that team. And so to sort of have a little bit of inside knowledge about what Silvergate was, for me, made that even sadder when they sort of were taken down, or sort of collateral damage of some of the stuff that's been going on in the industry by people I would consider bad actors. And and then we saw just a ripple effect of these other sort of crypto friendly or even just tech friendly banks struggling to, remain intact. And it does feel to me like there is some regulatory pressure coming from two sides. So if you think about how people access Bitcoin, like someone brand new to the industry, they need a bank account to connect to an exchange, right? And so if crypto-friendly banks are being attacked and platforms are facing Wells notices and enforcement actions from the SEC, there's sort of this two-angled attack going on the industry. And really that, in my mind, is the biggest risk of sort of new entry into the cryptocurrency space in the United States would be those two. But at the same time, I've talked to other banks that are already sort of trying to swoop into those roles and help these companies. And I'm not sure that that those sort of banks can just continue to be taken down.
Yeah, it's fascinating because there's many layers to this. On one hand, you have Elizabeth Warren and these folks involved, potentially working with short sellers. Crypto banks or crypto friendly banks were the ones that were initially targeted, but now it's trickling down to all the other smaller regional banks. But then you have these larger banks like your JP Morgan coming in and swooping it up. And it's like this centralization of banking taking place, a big tectonic shift happening here with banking. And then some people have theories about, the future of CBDCs and how that's all going to flow through the economy. So it's like there's so many layers to this. And do you think some of this Operation Chokepoint is a bit of a knee-jerk reaction to FTX and Sam Bankman-Fried? And let's put it, a lot of people feel like he stabbed him in the back in DC. What are your thoughts on that?
Yeah, I think that the FTX debacle and alleged fraud is something very easy for regulators to point to and say, see, we told you so. We told you needed to be regulated better. We told you that this was all, shadowy super coders and bad actors. And so that anytime something negative happens in the industry as an attorney, I just, want to take a vacation for a day or two because I know what's coming. It means that the regulatory agencies are going to use that to justify what's happened. I think also there is collateral damage from the FTX situation. There were banks or third parties that were involved in FTX that sort of were negatively impacted. And so, it's just the whole thing's been unfortunate. I think that a lot of people in the industry do feel like the FTX situation set us back from a regulatory perspective. The frustrating thing from my perspective is that regulators will use a situation like that to point to a justification for more regulation. But the regulations that stood in place didn't prevent it.
Right.
And at its core, the SEC is intended to protect investor protection, and that means proactively protecting, right? Not just being punitive and doing enforcement actions on the back end, or once something blows up, it's they don't have to do anything.
Yeah, and look, a lot of people are frustrated with Gary Gensler and the SEC because, to your point, Sam Bankman-Fried was at the SEC and the FTX officials were there. And apparently they were working on some, I don't know if it was federal bit license or something like that. But the SEC clearly didn't do their due diligence, didn't check on the FTX.com, which was outside the US. And obviously we know how that played out. And there was also no investigations into Celsius. But then it was Kim Khardashian, right? And it's like, well, what about it's like the guys are robbing the bank. We're not paying attention to them, but we're paying attention to maybe the panhandler or something, right? It's like, come on.
I went on Fox the day that the Kim Kardashian news came out, and I was just like, that's really who we're worried about? Like that. I mean, obviously she has a far-reaching audience and promoters of things, of tokens, and shilling tokens that then lose all their value isn't a good thing. But It does sort of seem like sort of low-hanging fruit has been the focus for a while. But now we are seeing these enforcement actions against centralized exchanges, and Coinbase receiving a Wells notice and then taking the SEC to task about it, which has been really interesting to watch.
Yeah, it seems like the industry, which I really like, is going on the offensive. Grayscale suing the SEC, like you mentioned, Coinbase, and obviously Ripple's been fighting back the SEC in that lawsuit. And I hope more U.S. companies start doing the same. And one thing I didn't really like is that Kraken didn't fight back and they settled. But hopefully more of these folks can come together. So on that note, what do you think about the Coinbase lawsuit against the SEC? Do you think that this could carry some weight and put some pressure on the SEC?
Yeah, I mean, to your point, I love when I see companies challenging the SEC, not even necessarily because I think that they'll win or that I necessarily think it's super clear cut, because unfortunately it's very difficult to battle against a regulator. Yeah. But it usually leads to clarity for the industry. And it's a pretty in some ways it's, companies have motives for doing what they do in terms of litigation strategy, but it costs a lot of money. Yeah. I've heard insane numbers of from the Ripple XRP lawsuit. And so these companies are spending this, great deal of funds to try to just get some clarity for themselves, but it'll positively impact the industry. I think that I used to be in-house at Coinbase. I think that many companies, including Coinbase, had a tone for many years of, we are willing to cooperate. We'll come in and talk to you. We'll come in and register. And when these companies eventually start to see that it's almost a catch-22, like you're going to get in trouble if you don't register, but we're not going to make it clear on how you can register. Eventually, you have to sort of throw up your hands and say, what is it? Like, you need to provide something more. And so, Coinbase went the route of a writ of mandamus, which is asking the court to, force some sort of action and clarity. And, I think it's great. And I hope it goes great for them. I hope it at least, it seems like what they're really asking for is, what's the path forward? And, Coinbase is an interesting example. Everything I'm commenting on is based on public knowledge, not my time there. But, they acquired a broker dealer years ago. They had the Crypto Rating Council that tried to sort of be a industry-wide initiative to try to rank and judge the likelihood that a cryptocurrency is or isn't a security. So they've definitely made efforts to try to say, is this what you're looking for, SEC? Is this, can this broker dealer be applied to crypto? I think they have I think they're very justified in the aggression that they now are showing the SEC.
For sure. Yeah. It's retail investors. Now you have the entire industry just frustrated and going on the offensive against the SEC. And, you got members of Congress calling out Gary Gensler in hearings and clearly showing he's not a good faith regulator. And the hearing just a few weeks ago where they asked him laser targeted pinpoint questions. Is Ethereum a security? And he couldn't answer. Is XRP a security? And it's just like, really, man, come on. What are we dealing with here? This is so ridiculous.
Yeah, it's it's a tough situation because the SEC has the justification for wanting all these cryptocurrencies to be securities is that gives them much more jurisdiction over this financial sector. That means that they can justify higher budget, right? Like they can ask for more money because they have to oversee more things, but they also don't want to be too proactive in why they explain something or isn't a security, because I think they're very clear. I'm clear from just my time on crypto Twitter, like this industry is really smart. We're going to kind of like pick apart things that we hear from regulatory agencies. I think the SEC has seen that speeches where, different, commissioners or chairmen said certain things like that can be brought up and is being used, for example, in the Ripple case. I think Gary Gensler is just like, doesn't want to say anything, but, if they continue to be challenged enough, I don't see how they're going to continue on in this way. All they need to do is to allow one exchange to become registered and a ICO or cryptocurrency to become a registered security with them. And then they actually have justification to say, see, that's how you do it. That's the roadmap. That's what we want everyone to do. But that's just not, we just can't get there. That's the starting point.
Yeah, it's so frustrating, as an innovator, an entrepreneur, even as an investor, it's ridiculous. And you see other countries and jurisdictions opening up your doors. It's clear what's the security, what's not, what's a virtual currency and so forth. And my worry is that this thing takes so long. Congress is slow to act over, in general, that a lot of capital leaves, a lot of entrepreneurs leave, and it hurts the United States. We benefited so much from the internet and embracing that tech. We don't get as much benefits this time around because this is a global asset class. That's
what I really can't believe is just, I think of the United States as supporting, liberties, freedom, and innovation, right? We were leaders in many industries in the past in terms of innovation. And it really feels like a strange changing tides if that's something we want other countries to start doing better than us. My least favorite conversation is with clients who say, we think we should just figure out the best way to geofence the U.S. We're the founders. We're in the U.S. We'll move somewhere. We'll create our entity there. We'll do anything you advise us to do. We don't want to deal with the regulatory risk or lift here, and that's frustrating. Not because of the legal work it entails. It's frustrating because that means they're not here for jobs and opportunities and for, US consumers to have access to those products. But I've also seen a lot of clients are still very much like, we're staying here and we're going to do it the right way. And we'll go talk to these regulators, even though they don't always seem cooperative, and we hope that we're the exception, that we can get it right and we can stay here. So yeah, I think it's just about like the regulators wanting to cooperate with us. And I think you brought up a good point earlier about CBDCs. If the goal is to put all of the technology of cryptocurrency just back into a central bank digital currency, then clearly regulators have ulterior reasons to want this industry to not work out. But I think we are starting to see regulators, politicians that think differently about that and really understand. So I continue to stay cautiously optimistic year after year.
Yeah, to your point, like there is a bit of a light at the end of the tunnel because I'm seeing more members of Congress coming on board, like you're saying. Just that hearing with Gary Gensler, that I don't think Gary's been grilled like that ever on crypto. No. So, and we're seeing both Democrats and Republicans doing it. And then, we have presidential candidates, Ron DeSantis, regardless of how you feel or, about political sides, RFK Jr., I think Vivek Ramaswamy, whatever his name is. These guys are pro crypto, pro Bitcoin. What are your thoughts on that? It's an age thing, right? That the older generation that's in Congress right now, they don't understand Facebook. You look at the Facebook hearing, right? So I can imagine it's hard to understand crypto, and maybe there's a bit of that. What are your thoughts on these new fresh blood candidates?
I do think that the generational thing adds to this because the economy and traditional finance used to work better. We didn't need something new, right? Like people could, one member of a household could work and they could afford a house and there wasn't crazy inflation and, investments were easier to access. And even on a global perspective, we're seeing inflation and things negatively impact. So the need for this sort of technology, I think, continues to increase, even if certain individuals don't recognize those changes that are happening or aren't impacted by them, right? And if you're not directly negatively impacted by something, you don't have a problem, so you don't need a solution, but other people do. I saw RFK Jr. speak in Miami. I was actually really impressed because, of course, part of this is like looking for voter support, and he's accepting donations in Bitcoin, which I think is really awesome. But he, you can tell that he and his team have done their work. He was saying words like no Bitcoin node and talking about self-custody and things that just I haven't heard, people in government positions, especially presidential candidates, speak about. And it thrusts this industry into the limelight when that happens, right? I mean, the last time that happened was when the Biden executive order came out about the crypto industry. In a less positive way, right? That was sort of him saying, hey, all these regulators need to go explore the risks of this industry and what it means for the economy and that sort of thing. But it made, headline news in terms of it. That means that, the White House the White House wasn't aware of Bitcoin, or worried about Bitcoin, I should say, like 10 years ago, right? Like the industry has gotten to a place where now it has to be a topic. So, I think it'll be really interesting to hear how pro, crypto, pro Bitcoin candidates impact the discussions and like the debates that have to go on, because they're, part of the speech in Bitcoin Miami was not just about Bitcoin. It was about what it symbolizes, right? This idea of sovereignty, financial freedom. Even he sort of analogized the financial freedom to the same thing as free speech, right? Like, I mean, you make statements and value judgments with money and how you use it. Right. And if you don't have some sort of financial privacy there, do you really have freedom? So those concepts, I didn't think about those things before I got into this industry. And if that starts getting other people around the United States thinking about those things, I think that's really exciting.
For sure. Yeah. And I feel like, as mentioned before, light at the end of the tunnel, seeing these folks. I know part of it is politics, but the fact that they are, they have to, it is a ballot issue. It's not the top, maybe it's not the top three, but it's on the ballot, and people are definitely going to vote based on that, as one of the items on the checklist. So that's great to see, and just seeing more bipartisan support of crypto is great. I want to get your thoughts on the two lawsuits, SEC versus Ripple, and then Grayscale. What are your thoughts on how this SEC Ripple lawsuit's going? And look, there's some developments around the Hinman documents, and some potential impropriety there. I'm not saying there is, but potential. Some people sometimes get caught up in, okay, it's Ethereum, but it could have been any other token. It's not so much the crypto or the token. It's the SEC. They're the ones that are being accused of impropriety here. What are your thoughts on that and the potential conclusion?
Yeah, I mean, I think Ripple's doing an awesome job in that case. I see the Ripple chart behind you. I like we were discussing earlier, these lawsuits help bring regulatory clarity, and the fact that just recently it seems like there's some documents and speeches and also internal emails that might be reflective of the SEC sort of internal discussions or ideas on this topic is huge. And the fact that I think those are being released in mid-June, I think I heard June 13th or something, to the public. I mean, if the idea is that there's regulatory clarity, then I don't see why the SEC is concerned about transparency and that stuff. They are. And part of it is because of this pending litigation. But I think any opportunity for companies and lawyers to get insight into what the SEC is thinking, or even how it's changed, and where it should lie. I mean, I just hope that it leads to more conversations. I mean, I got a lot of shit years ago from the XRP army for tweeting something about XRP that I thought it would be deemed a security. And I think people misunderstood that a little in terms of me hoping that it would be, or liking that the SEC regulates the space the way it does. Like, I don't at all. I hope Ripple wins. I just felt like they had seen a lot of success and were maybe an easy target because there's a clear sort of leadership and company involved. And I mean, I think I was right that they did become a target, but I've been really excited to see how they've responded. And if, I've heard it could be weeks, or at least weeks or months or sometime in this year that we may actually, get some sort of conclusion to that. And I'm really interested to see what that is.
Yeah. And I'm hoping, I'm hoping for a Ripple victory, of course, like you are. And I know it's going to help set a precedent for the entire market and allow other projects maybe to fight back against the SEC based on like fair notice and these different things.
Right.
And
it's motivational, right? Because if you tell a client, all right, I mean, they've spent on litigation so far $200 million. You tell a client, okay, well, let's go fight the SEC. It's going to be $200 million. The first question is going to be like, well, what are the chances of success, right? Like even if I have $200 million, what's the chance of success? And so, we're finding that out, and I really have been impressed with how they've been doing.
And let's talk about Grayscale. Obviously, suing the SEC over denial of a Bitcoin spot ETF. The SEC has, of course, approved a futures ETF, a short ETF, but not a spot ETF. Some folks have said it looks like Grayscale has a strong chance of winning. What are your thoughts?
Yeah, I forget when it was, maybe a year or two ago, I wrote a Forbes article that said why the SEC stance on this may need to change. Because if you think through their reasoning, what they're saying is we can't approve a spot Bitcoin ETF because companies haven't demonstrated that it isn't prone to market manipulation. But they're using the same methodology in a spot ETF as they do in a futures.
Right.
They're looking at the price and doing sort of an aggregate amongst different industry leaders to determine, and prevent market manipulation. So I think that's really what Grayscale is focused on, is explain what the difference is, if there is one, because we don't see it. And it seems like you're just arbitrarily saying, I think that a spot Bitcoin ETF would bring a lot more people into the fold because they don't have to have direct exposure and hold Bitcoin, but there's a lot of people that are interested in what's going to happen in the markets and things like that. So that's another one that feels like it's just been going on forever. Like it's just going on and on. But I think there's going to be some movement there over the next few months, hopefully, as well.
Hailey, what do you think about this thesis that I have? And I don't think it's far-fetched or outlandish. And sometimes people may say, oh, this is a bit conspiracy theory, but I feel like the SEC is almost weaponized against crypto to protect incumbents, like banking incumbents and TradFi incumbents. And at the same time, while all these Wells notices and lawsuits are going against crypto startups, BlackRock is partnering with Coinbase, launching a Bitcoin spot trust. Fidelity is launching their crypto services. Visa and MasterCard continue to build and do all kinds of stuff with stablecoins. And then you have NASDAQ slated to launch their crypto custody soon. BNY Mellon launched crypto custody last year. So I look at these two things in parallel. I'm like, what's going on here? I don't see BlackRock getting a Wells notice.
Yeah, they look very comfortable getting into the space, right? I think that makes a lot of sense. I also think that some people miss that, Gary Gensler may be going for, Secretary of the Treasury or a different role in the future. And so a lot of it's sort of a trickle down effect. If there's someone in certain roles that has a reason to, protect, like you said, incumbents or banks or these traditional financial industry, then it's sort of like a wink, wink, nod, nudge, nudge, like help make sure that happens. I've become a lot more cynical of some of the ways governments operate especially since I got into the space and post-COVID and things like that. So I don't think that seems far-fetched, but I also think that that Bitcoin is a meaningful enough technology and opportunity for people that it's, there's no way it's going anywhere. And there's no way it's even really being too negatively impacted by this sort of stuff without a fight. And that's what, I like to see and like helping clients do, is keeping this industry thriving, even with everything we've seen over the last year. So It's kind of a survivor industry.
Yeah, no, to your point, and the final question here, despite everything that happened last year, and the FTX thing was such a big blow, Bitcoin rallied at the beginning of this year, and the halving is next year. And there's no shutting down of the Bitcoin blockchain or these other blockchains out there. They're still going. Companies may come and go, and the SEC may send a Wells notice to 10 more companies or whatever, but that's not stopping the blockchain and Bitcoin itself. So on that note, do you see the halving 4-year cycle playing out again? I'm not asking for a price prediction, but
I'm not very good at those, so I wouldn't want to. No, yeah, I do. I think that, I mean, one thing that I pointed out after the FTX situation is, well, if you wanted a good example of the risks of centralization, you got it, right? I mean, a centralized company, even built on crypto or Bitcoin or blockchain, there's still things that may not be known to the general public. I mean, that's not how the Bitcoin network works. And it also, there's no CEO, there's no company. It's why we're all here. Yeah, I think there's only room to continue growing the industry and seeing the price continue to increase over time. So I'm still the most bullish I've ever been. Every single day, I get more bullish instead of less. Even if my day job gets harder and I get more and more frustrated with certain companies or certain regulators.
I don't know if you saw the news yesterday, but there was like a lot of coverage on Chinese TV about Hong Kong opening up retail investment into Bitcoin and crypto and banking services and these things opening up. So it seems like the US's loss is these other countries gain, and I feel like China is about to do a 180 because Hong Kong is under China's control and allowing crypto.
I didn't see that exact news, but like I said earlier, I just can't believe that the United States is willing to lose sort of the fight for innovation or even just like technological advancements. Like is it called FedWire?
FedNow, I think.
FedNow. Yeah. Like FedNow is launching, sometime this summer, I think. And I think like, I'm into Bitcoin. I don't really, but that seems to me like the banks almost admitting that they haven't been innovative, right? We've had ACH and wire for all these years. We have to wait 3 to 5 business days to send something. Moving things overseas costs so much, sending money to other countries costs all this money. To me, that seems like almost a implicit acknowledgement that there needed to be some sort of innovation there. And there is. And so if Bitcoin and blockchain technology can offer that, it's frustrating that the United States wouldn't appreciate that innovation.
And to your point, I mean, all these central banks now, including the Fed, looking to build CBDCs, taking the blockchain, tokenizing fiat on it and programming it, of course. That's clearly right. If Bitcoin and all these cryptos and digital assets were crap and it didn't solve anything or provide a solution, why are you moving fiat to it, right?
Yeah. You're pretty much stealing the idea, but then putting it back into your control. Sometimes it feels almost too obvious what's going on. It's like, okay, like I've seen this play before.
Exactly. Hailey, great stuff. Pleasure chatting with you. And we got to do this more often because you have great insight, but thank you for joining me.
Yeah, I'd love to. I'm sure we'll have more to talk about even in just a few months. So thanks for having me on.